it's always great to talk about product, and it's even better to talk about product to people who love product. So as a quick intro, my name is Chandra. I run product and growth for Headspace right here in Santa Monica, and prior to that was a product leader at social gaming company Zynga, and did product for Amazon before that, and in a life before that I was a mechanical engineer doing physical products for your home, and so I've done a lot of consumer products, and in a decade plus sort of life in product, one of the things I've gained is really a deep empathy for people in the profession. It's not an easy profession. It's actually a very hard profession. And so when I was invited to sort of speak at Product School, I thought about, gosh, how do we help product people? How do we make their life even a little bit easier, even a little bit more fun? And wouldn't that be a great outcome for the talk? So that was sort of the frame that I took. And the particular use case that I picked is a very critical part in the journey of a product person's life, which is when this person is made a head of product at a growth stage company. So that as a use case, and how could I guide somebody who's sort of looking at that as an aspiration? So I'm curious, as I look at the room, if I could get a raise of hands, how many of you are already doing product, like in any sort of function? Amazing, it's quite high. How many of you want to be a head of product at some point in the future? Great. So we have something for you tonight, and I think, look, I mean, for people who are already in the profession, you'll relate to this. This is my learning, right? It's not the result of a statistically significant A/B test. So with any of this kind of talk, you have to take it with a pinch of salt, and you have to sort of see, like, okay, which of this actually applies in my situation, and how do I use some of it? So that's just a caveat, with any of the stuff. It's very personal, and I think what I'd like to start off with is really sort of a core scenario. Okay, so here's the scenario. So the scenario is, imagine you've been made head of product at a growth stage company, right? So picture that for a minute. It's kind of cool, right? Because the head of product role is actually one of the most coveted and impactful roles at any company, at any growth stage company. And so you just made that role. So it's kind of a big moment in your life. And you feel this sort of power and responsibility. And you are, in some ways you feel like a superhero, and you get these wings, right? And it's definitely something to cherish, as a moment. The challenge, though, is if you don't approach it right from day one, it can quickly become a situation where you are the focal point for multiple challenging issues. Whether it's results, whether it's innovation, whether it's quality of software, whether it's speed. Hey, why can't we ship stuff more quickly? And a whole bunch of other stuff. And sometimes all at once. So you might get hit from different directions all at once. And it's hard to sort of respond to that if you're not prepared. And it can create a bit of a downward spiral, right? So this is really about, okay, how do you get ahead of it? How do you, right from day one, how do you approach it so you increase your odds of success at the role? And this is really about sort of three simple but powerful steps that you can take to actually be successful at a head of product role. What I call establish clarity, gain leverage, and execute with purpose. And if you can do those three things, you can really increase your odds of success at sort of this critical stage in your career. So what's what's a product talk without a roadmap, right? So this is how we're going to go through the talk. So we're going to have really, multiple three key bullets, but each of them will have a certain sort of sequence of how you actually approach it, and we'll wrap with a discussion. I really want to sort of hear from all of you. But look, if there's things you want to discuss during the talk, just interrupt me and raise your hand, and we can talk about it at any point. So the first thing is about establishing clarity. So this is about product vision. So where do you want to take the product? Like, what does the future look like? What is a better world as a result of all your efforts, right? So there's lots and lots of consensus that this is important. There's no debate about it. But what's missing is guidance around how to actually do it. There's not enough sort of guidance around how do you actually build a product vision doc. And so the first step is what I call creating a minimum viable vision. And what is that? And how do you do it? So this, it does not require any special powers or crystal balls for you to do a minimum viable vision. What we're going to talk about is a simple, repeatable process that you can follow to actually get to a minimum viable vision. So the three key components of a product vision document are product phases, product strategies, and key principles. So product phases are the most inspiring. They sort of paint the picture of the future. How does life get better as you keep working on your product? Product strategies are the most abstract and simple by design. And we're going to start there. That's where I'd recommend you start. And then key principles are most operational. They help you make decisions on day-to-day as you prioritize features, as you have lively debates with different stakeholders. Those are the most operational. So start with product strategies. So product strategies really outline how you create value in a differentiated way for your users. And how do you come up with that? So you, as a head of product, you're the author of this document, but that doesn't mean the pressure is on you to actually generate this document. So what you do is you just talk to key people on the team as a starting point, right? You can mine the company for the collective wisdom on what are these sort of potential strategies. You can talk to founders, you can talk to the management team, you can talk to your customer service people, you can read reviews, you can talk to customers, you can talk to existing product managers on your team, you can talk to researchers, and you start getting patterns. You start seeing, there's these recurring themes across what everybody's saying on how we create unique differentiated value, and you generate a list of strategies. And then what you do is you don't over-process it, you just generate a list of strategies. And then you prioritize. You say, okay, what are the most important? What are the top 3 amongst those strategies? You inspect them for a few things. One, are they user-centric? Do they keep the user in mind when you describe them? So that's one. 2 is, are they simple? Like, are they complex, or are they simple to understand? Are they simple to communicate? Are they constant over time? So if you think about a user need today and you project forward to maybe a couple of decades later, will it still be true? Is it something intrinsic about people and human beings and how we are driven, and is it constant over time? Is it easy to get agreement? Like, if you walk into a room and say, look, this is important, does everybody nod their head? That means it's a good sort of product strategy. And the last is, does it have innovation capacity? What I mean by that is, can you actually solve it in a quarter or 2? Then it's not really a very powerful strategy. It doesn't have much innovation capacity. It's a small problem, But if you can innovate against it for decades, that means you're onto something, and that's a powerful strategy. So what are some examples? So obviously some of these are familiar. Amazon has price, selection, convenience, right? Very user-centric, easy to agree, constant over time, and you can get a ton of innovation capacity. Netflix, personalized, easy, huge selection. So So once you have that, it gets more interesting because now you can start. It gets more creative. You can imagine these strategies play out over time, and you can start describing what the future looks like. And this is totally made up. Like, you don't have to worry about being accurate or complete. It's more
made fun of by your colleagues.
Exactly. It's very much sort of an inspirational bit of work where you bring it to life. So let's use a very sort of almost simple example, but to illustrate it. So imagine you're writing the product vision doc for the transportation industry like a few hundred years ago, right? So it's probably easy to say that the three sort of strategies for the transportation industry are easier, faster, safer. And it's not crazy to imagine that people want to go faster to their destinations. They want it to be easy and they want it to be safe. They don't want to be hit by anything else on the way. So that's easy. So once you lock that in, it's virtually impossible to predict all these phases, right? But what is possible is to say, look, I think most likely there's going to be a change of the source of energy of transportation, right? So that's one. You can probably guess that. The second is cabins are probably going to get really comfortable and safe. It's probably a reasonable guess. And the third is there's probably going to be a shift from ground to air at some point, right? Because Da Vinci had like drawings of air, like even way before the Wright brothers actually like invented flight. So even though you don't exactly get the dates and the technology shifts right, like you can actually predict reasonably well what's going to happen. And with the simple vectors of easier, faster, safer. And then what you do is you bring it to life. You say, you could create a narrative around it. You could say, picture this world, this is what's going to happen. You could create illustrations around it. You could even do videos. If you have the budget and the talent, like you could go all out here and you could say like, look, this is the vision. And it's not accurate, but it's inspirational. And once you do that, you have the third bit, which is sort of the key principles, which are really more tactical and help you make decisions on the ground. And these are, you can say, hey, we value speed over sort of getting it right. We value users over business. We value action over just research. Like whatever you value as a team, you can sort of lay it out. So together, you sort of crafted your first version of the minimum viable vision. And it can, you might feel like you want to jump up with joy because you've gotten this document. And you can allow yourself a little dance at this point. But remember that this is just the first step. You've just gotten the minimum viable vision. And we're going to go through massive rewrites of this before you get to the actual vision. And you've got to be very, very low ego and open to just ripping it apart, rewriting it. And that's the second stage. So the second stage is iterate n plus times. Here n is, it can be 50 times or more than 50 times. And that's okay. That's actually a good thing. So how do you do that? So you start with the most trusted group of people. You start with founders, you start with your head of engineering, you start with mentors, even board members. There's sometimes board members who are really helpful, very product oriented. And you iterate. You just iterate. Like you just take them through it, you get all the feedback, you stay curious, iterate. You then broaden the sort of the iteration to all the leads of everybody who you value, but also who are key to the eventual success of the product vision doc, right? Because you need people to actually buy into the stuff. So these could be like functional needs, like design, research, engineering, customer service. And the signal that you're getting closer is you get less and less feedback and more excitement. And that's when you know you're onto something. And until then, like tirelessly work to keep reworking the doc. Once you do that, you're at sort of the third stage, which is the rollout. And the rollout, what I recommend is this roadshow format. The roadshow format is the best for buy-in. So, groups of 8 people in a room. So there's sort of a rule of thumb. Beyond 8 people, you lose there's more shyness, so people don't actually speak up. So 8 people is a sweet spot where people speak out, there's debate. So choose that intimate setting, 8 people at a time. You have to do it a few times to cover your whole company. If your company is 200 people, it's a lot of sessions, but it's important. And then email those that cannot make those meetings, including board members. And at this point, you have to be more confident. You know, this is not an iteration stage. This is a rollout stage, and you have to be much more, you should still note maybe some recurring issues that you're seeing, but it's more about just clarifying. It's like, hey, this is what this means, this is what this means, and being open to that back and forth. And that gives you sort of the overall, it closes the process. And so now you have clarity on what you're running in. You have this great vision doc, and you have people who are bought into it. And what you need next is you need leverage to execute on the product vision. You can't execute without leverage. So the way you get leverage, the first step is start with the right talent. And the core idea with talent is you have to think of it as if you're building a pro sports team. So a pro sports team, what's unique about it is everybody is strong at something different and is really good at what they do. So how do you bring a mix of, really good people and who are really good at what they do but are different from each other? And how do you also blend a mix of what I call hunters and farmers? And I'll dig into it a little bit more, but it's really the idea of being results oriented versus process oriented. And it's just different mindsets. And at this point, you have to really evaluate if you have all the pieces you need to build the product. Because sometimes you might need content, you might need design, there are these dependencies. And you have to flesh it out and say, like, look, am I set up for success, or do I need some other functions to actually feed into it? And I just wanted to sort of share a little bit of, what are the flavors of product managers? And from a sort of a skill standpoint, there's product managers that have one of these three as their superpowers. They're either sort of production oriented, so they ship stuff, they get stuff out the door, or analytics oriented, so really understand, hey, what's working, what's not in the product, and very much focused on feature analysis, user behavior analysis. Or some who are very like ideas driven, like, hey, coming up with new ideas, new flows. You want a minimum sort of bar across all three, but you can tell that people are good at one of those three more than the others, right? So from a skill standpoint, there's those sort of circles. From a mindset standpoint, you have the sort of the farmers versus hunters. And the hunters are much more like, hey, tell me what you need me to deliver and I'll get it done. The farmers are much more process oriented, like, hey, what is the first step, what is the second step? And none of this is good or bad, by the way. What you need is a healthy mix of these different personas on your team, and you have to match it to what your sort of team needs are. But you have to like understand that what you're building is that sports team, with these different sort of personalities. Once you have the right talent, you have to cluster them correctly. If you don't cluster them well, it's not going to work. So here's some sort of broad principles. So the first idea is this idea of cut lines. So as you're building a product team or a growth team, you need to sort of define how you're going to cut the overall problem set into manageable chunks, so different teams can run after it. So there's no right or wrong answers here, but I'll give you a few ways to cut things. So one way is to cut it by platform. So you can say, hey, we'll have an iOS team, we'll have an Android team, we'll have a web team, right? The other way is to cut it by service. So we have, our product is really an aggregation of services. We have a search service, we have a recommendation service, etc. And we have people sort of owning each of those services. A third way is just to cut it. You might have different products completely. So you might have a B2B product, you might have a B2C product, so you can cut it that way. Or the other way that I've seen things being cut is based on the funnel. So how many people are running after sort of early part of the experience, and then deeper, conversion, retention, engagement, like different stages of the funnel. So again, there's no real right or wrong answers, and you have to probably change this multiple times when you're running product, and it's key to just to understand like what are the different ways to do it. The key though is when you're cutting these sort of, the cut lines, when you're creating these cut lines, is to solve for minimum dependency between teams. Because you don't want people to trip over each other, you don't want people to come in each other's way, you want them to run as fast as they can without any interference. And so from an autonomy standpoint, you want to make sure that you're solving for minimal dependency when you're cutting these teams. The other idea that I want to introduce is this idea called minimum viable teams. So you might notice that certain teams are struggling, and you might see that you might find upon closer inspection that they are missing like this one key element. It could be like maybe a data scientist, it could be like an embedded product designer, or it could be like a backend engineer. So you have to make sure the team is actually complete for them to be successful. If not, it's actually on the product leader, because you've set them up for failure, and you've not given them sort of the minimum viable team to run after things. So that's, yeah.
I had a question in terms of like competing for resources, right?
Yeah.
So it'd be great to have your AAA quality person just focus on your new shiny idea and product, but at the same time they're working on critical products and probably wearing other hats in multiple areas because they're that good at everyone once a piece of their time. Have you been able to work with that before?
Yeah. So one tactic I would recommend there is this idea called sort of flex resource. Okay, so we've created this Slack channel at work, which is called just resource pooling. And so if somebody has a resource need, they raise their hand and say, hey, can somebody give me like a high quality iOS engineer? And so there's usually Slack in the system. And so somebody reaches out and say, actually, I can loan you for like 2 weeks. Boom, and your transaction complete, and you solve sort of both ends. And I think to a certain scale it works. Beyond that, you probably have to do it more at like a, maybe at a team level.
So do you take the risk of thinking, okay, I can get that resource for a while, but I can't get away with it for too long if we're pursuing, this type of feature? We're really going to have some quality people dedicated.
Right.
How do you take the chance or the risk? Because you want to do it, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you might want to consider, the risks of doing that, because you're not going to get them. Somebody else wants to get them.
Yeah. I think it boils down to the specific situation. So basically, what I usually ask the teams is to present sort of options and trade-offs, and as a product leader, you have to make the call and understand sort of, okay, if you get this, here's what you lose, and is that a fair trade-off? And sometimes you have to escalate it to the CEO to understand, is that fair? Sometimes you can make the call, but I think what you need to ask the team is for the information to make the decision of, hey, what do I get, what do I lose, and for how long, and what is the are there any sort of long-term implications around it? So once you do that, you have these teams, and you have to watch for troubling symptoms. So you might see, if there's like if you're hearing like lack of clarity, lack of direction, it probably means your PMs are either a bit weak, or maybe you don't have enough PMs. So that's something you should watch out for. If you're seeing the experience isn't good, like the user experience isn't great, it's probably because you don't have the right mix of designers, or the right level of designers, or enough designers. So it's just where you should dig for. Or if you see you're not seeing throughput, like you're not seeing things like moving through the team's not delivering much software, then it's probably tied to just the mix of engineers on that team, maybe seniority, maybe sort of the right, combination. And that's how you inspect and try to understand if things are okay. The most important thing at this point is usually, in early stage, you want to make sure you level set with your teams, not to get married too early to metrics or missions, because as a product leader, you want to have the flex to change, and you want to sort of level set and say, hey, this is just the initial sort of setup, and we're going to iterate on this. And because people, get comfortable with, like, if you say, hey, you own this metric, you own this mission, people get comfortable. And then it acts against you as a product leader to be able to change it. So there's a classic sort of question around, hey, what about, and this is very, very popular question, which is, what about core product versus growth? Like, what's the difference? Like, how do you set it up? So core product is, structurally, there's a few similarities and a few differences. So core product is really about, you have, let's say, these cross-functional squads or teams, product owner, designer, multiple engineers. Growth, you also have squads, but growth is also, you have other sub-functions. So one of them is what I call frontline. So frontline is your performance marketing and CRM. So it's much more sort of rapid iteration. And then you have growth tech, which is the tools and capabilities that power your experimentation. So when you start off, if you're starting off, you probably want to start small. So maybe like a couple of squads on core product, maybe one squad on growth, and a light frontline team, just to get things going, start measuring performance marketing, things like that. But even though at the surface level, the squad, you see a squad model on core product and growth, they actually function a bit differently, and it's a bit nuanced. So the squad model on growth is really about capturing the most value from the product that you already have. It's not about creating new value for users. Whereas on core product, it's about continuously creating more value for your users. The mindset you want on growth is really the hunter mindset. You want people who are hungry, who want to move metrics, who want to get it done. On product, it's more process driven, much more sort of user need centric. The primary obsession here is metrics. There it's user needs. The focus areas usually for growth are simpler. It's flows, pricing, messaging. On core product, it's the experience and it's the functionality. And the dev cycles much shorter, longer on product. Measure of success, have you moved metrics? The product, it depends. It could be engagement, it could be satisfaction, it could be usage. So that's a broad definition. But having said that, here's what makes it confusing. Sometimes you can approach core product through a growth lens. And I'll tell you why. Sometimes the value of your core product is a function of the number of users that use it. So like a social network or like a double-sided platform. In which case, you actually benefit by using a growth approach to core product, because ultimately growth is creating value for your users. So that's one sort of nuance there. The other nuance is sometimes a growth approach, you run out of steam and you have to take a product approach. So let's say you're optimizing onboarding, you're making all the changes to the flows and you're making all the changes to your messaging. You probably hit diminishing returns pretty quickly, and then you have to reimagine the experience. So you might have to take a core product approach to a growth problem. And so that's, again, the job of the product leader to say, actually, at this point, we need to take a growth approach versus like a core product approach. So think of these more as tools in your toolkit as opposed to being very sort of rigidly married to where you use them, and use them opportunistically depending on what you need to do. So you have the right talent, you've clustered them. Now you've got to arm them with the right capabilities. And for me, the table stakes for a successful product and growth operations are, number one is complete event tracking. So knowing what every single user is doing in the product, tracking everything so you can actually understand what's working, what's not. Having a self-serve layer so your product managers can access the data in a self-serve fashion. They know they can cut it in a few basic ways so they can understand what is going on. And number two is an experimenter. So how do you build the infrastructure to create different experiences for different people? And this could be based on platforms, based on sort of A/B tests, or based on geographies. So maybe you launch something in Canada or Australia to test something, or even user segments. So how do you have this basic capability around experimenter? And the third is messaging. It's table stakes. How do you message in-app? How do you message through channels? and how you get use it for engagement. So you established clarity, you gained leverage, and now you execute. Now you get to work, right? You execute, but you execute with purpose. So on one hand, you have this shiny object, you have this product vision doc, and it's tempting to just start with that. But what I would encourage you is to sort of pause that for a minute and start with the product that's live. So the odds are that your product is already live, and there's a whole bunch of data around it. Whether it's it's user feedback, it's metrics, or it's sort of tech stuff. And so I call it sort of attack problems mode, which is where you should start. But before that, as a leader, I want to make sure that you're framing things really well for your team. You don't want to frame things, you can completely deflate the morale on your team by telling them what to do. So you've got to be very careful how you frame things for your team. So my suggestion is stay above the line here. So give them the problem, they come up with a solution. Give them the question, they come up with the answer. Give them the what, they come up with the how. So this is proven time and again to drive increased morale as well as better results for the business. So as a leader, be very conscious of how you're framing things. Like don't tell them like, please do this, like please implement this, and that's a recipe for failure. So stay above the line and attack problems. So have your team come up with a list of problems, and these could be user problems, metric problems, or tech problems. So I just made up a list. So activation is an issue, churn is an issue, and there's a user issue, like didn't know what to do, maybe didn't find any relevant content, maybe engagement is an issue, maybe app crashes is an issue. And just make a list. Like don't judge it too much, just understand all the problems. And then prioritize, find out what the top few are, because you're going to have to go deeper on the top few. So go deep on the ones that matter the most for the business. And at this point, I would strongly consider a design researcher. Design researchers are really skilled at going deep into user needs, user insights. And even if you could, afford to hire one for your company, it's a huge unlock. It's a skill that PMs don't generally have. So, if you can complement a product management team with a design researcher, it's a huge unlock for the team. So they can go deep and say, like, look, here's what people are saying, but here's what they actually mean, and here's some sort of key insights, right? And then it's great because the team now has the problems. They can brainstorm and backlog solutions. So this becomes a great input to road mapping. But then the trap is you stay stuck with problems and you just sort of solve problems and you never see the light of the day on your vision. So the vision is still very, very important, and so what you have to do is you have to parallel track execution against the vision. So how do you do that? So the idea is you prototype against vision. So if you remember, the vision doc has product phases, product strategies, key principles. You sort of create a small team to prototype against it. Like, hey, go and build your most aspirational version of prototypes against this vision, and you could pick anything that you want to do. And I show this example of a concept car. So concept cars are really an interesting model because most concept cars actually never see the light of day. They're not made for actually mass production. What they do though is they do two things. One is they really inspire the people at the company to innovate. They say, oh, this is what could be possible. And they actually create these enabling technologies for you to start innovating again. So think of the concept car as an example of how you build prototypes against a vision. And you have to tell your team, like, hey, we may never build this, but that's okay, but it's an inspiration, and we can start sort of chipping away at that vision through the roadmap. So then what you do is you roadmap with a mix of both. You have solutions from problems, you have prototypes against vision, and then you have a mix, and that's your roadmap. And the cool part about this is every entry in your roadmap has a clear why. It's linked back to either a problem or it's linked back to some part of your product vision. And that's really, really important for the team to be excited about and know, okay, here's why we're actually going after this. So you have a roadmap. What you do is finally you actually execute and learn. And this is where the rubber meets the road. It's a very exciting sort of phase for product managers to launch stuff and see what happens. So I'm going to show you some real data. It's obviously sanitized, but this is real data. So we've, when we execute at Headspace, we launch a whole bunch of experiments. And what we see is there's a huge spread of outcomes, right? There's, so far we've had like one home run, which was really successful. We've had several sort of middle of the road, and some swings and misses that completely didn't do well. And that's okay. You're supposed to see that distribution. So execution creates that spread of outcomes. You start seeing, oh, that's cool. Like some do well, some don't. Like, and some of our guesses were wrong. Some of our guesses were like right. Some of our guesses were like totally off. And you start seeing that separation of data. And what we learned is one of the key metrics for us for success is how many times people repeat engage with a certain experiment in a given week. So what you see here is just repeat usage once, twice, thrice, 4 times, and you can see the separation occurring, especially with repeat usage. So what you learn is a few things. One, you learn what is the sort of the benchmark for my product to be successful, and this could be very different for your product. Like when you start executing, you learn, oh, this is the metric that makes sense for our product. 2, you get these insane successes once in a while that create an opportunity to dig deeper to understand why. Why was it successful? Why did it do so well? And when you do that, for us, this particular feature was amazing. Like it just changed the complete engagement curve of the product. When we dug into it, we can deconstruct success to learn sort of why was it successful. So what we learned with that singular feature is there were 3 keys to its success. 1, it had a very quick sort of aha moment. So very lightweight interaction, you could get the benefit of the feature, and there was instant feedback that you were doing it right. 2, there was clear sort of, we explained to people how and why to reuse that feature. And 3, we linked it well. We linked it both in-app and through channels, so we brought people back to the experience. And together, those created, the amazing results that we had. So once you deconstruct why something was successful, it's great because these learnings can be replicated. They can be applied to things that are already live. They can also be used to generate new ideas that can be successful right from day one. So I'm going to use a simple example just to show you how you could apply this even to a fairly successful and established feature like Spotify's Discover Weekly. So how many of you have experienced this feature? Great. So obviously, like it's one of my favorite features. It's amazing how it finds my favorite music, even stuff I haven't listened to, and it's great. But if you think about it, just from an illustration standpoint, there's opportunity, right? You take some of these learnings, you say, okay, there's probably a propensity model under the hood that's predicting what are the songs that I'm going to like, and my guess is they're going to sort it based on how likely you're going to like it. So that the first song, you're probably going to like it more than the second song. You're probably going to like it more than the third song, right? So you're probably doing that. The first time you use the feature, you're probably going to have an aha moment, like maybe after you listen to like a couple of songs. But there's nothing to sort of land that aha moment, whether it's maybe a short audio clip at the end of the first 2 songs. Hey, this is just your own personal playlist that we are going to curate for you every week on Monday. Like it's going to come every Monday, or maybe through an email, or maybe through sort of in-app. There's nothing that lands the aha for you, right? 2, so that's 1. So how do you land the sort of the core value prop of the feature, which I think you could improve this feature. The second is that leads to a nice segue to say, hey, do you want a push reminder every time we refresh your Discover Weekly playlist on Monday? And there could be a nice toggle right beneath the banner, and you could turn it on. and you could say, hey, I want to be reminded when you refresh my playlist. And then, come Monday, that push note can deep link into shuffle play. So all you do is you swipe, and boom, you're into your music that's perfect for you. My guess is if Spotify did those 3 things, they would see massive lifts to engagement for this feature. And we didn't even use any of their data. We just used some data that I had to sort of say like, hey, how will this work? But the point is not to criticize the feature, which is amazing. The point is to show you how you can use learnings and then replicate it, in different contexts to almost engineer success. You can actually engineer success if you know why something is working. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, how you approach the head of product role. Look, I mean, there is a lot more to product leadership, at a growth stage company than what I've covered. But what I wanted to do was really, how do we help people, how do we set them up for success right from day one? So this is meant to sort of, get people in a position of strength right from day one. And really, once you have that, you have people sort of impressed with you, they're like happy, they give you more stuff, and then you just have tailwinds that push you forward, right? So this is about that initial critical phase and getting that bit right, and hopefully it makes the life of somebody taking on such a role easier and more fun than it otherwise would be, because it could be stressful, and hopefully you can keep your sort of superhero wings for longer and stay that way through the journey. So with that, I wanted to just open up for discussion.
Being that you've worked on 2 like completely different products, one being games and one being like something for like a social cause, does your approach to product change based on the product?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there are some first principles of product management that are universal. They are universal truths. You can apply them in any context in any company. But there are certain nuances about how different companies approach product that you have to internalize when you go to a new company. And I'll give you an example. So at Headspace, we talk a lot about our authenticity of the experience. We talk a lot about how we make it playful and creatively excellent. And you see all the animations in the product, and I see it as a marriage of first principles product management and product leadership, which I've tried to extract a lot of that in what I've covered is first principles. So you can apply it in any context, but as a product leader or a product manager, you have to marry it with the localized ethos of that company to get the best results. And that could be through check-ins with like the founders who get the ethos really well. It could be through hiring for that kind of maybe content talent or creative talent, and there's different ways to do it, but I think the product role brings with it certain sort of discipline and best practices that are at the core fairly fundamental.
So in the first stage, you mentioned that there's a lot of reiterating, and mainly with sort of the giants of the company, the founders, the VPs, etc., and then going into the leaders, the team leaders, etc. So my question is, at what stage do you start reiterating with potential users or your targets?
Yeah, so the product vision is something you iterate internally. So you use user data, but it's a very heavy document to iterate with users. So you iterate on that internally. What you iterate with users is the prototypes. So let's say you build a prototype against the product vision. You want to make sure it's resonating at some level,
right.
and so that's where I would introduce sort of user.
So at what stage within your sort of 3 steps would that fall in?
That would be in the third one. So
okay.
It's the innovate from vision,
Okay.
where you build the prototype and you validate it, and it's the concept car idea.
When you spoke about above the line in terms of problems instead of solutions. How do you encourage teams to think that way if you work with teams that are used to being dictated solutions?
Yeah. It's a good question. I actually think that if you hire right, people will be very demotivated to be told what to do. If you hire wrong, it's usually a signal when you have people who want directions, it means you've probably not hired right. So that first step of start with the right talent, you should inspect that. You should say like, hey, are these, do they have the right mindset? Do they have the right sort of leveling? And it's not right or wrong. It's just, especially on product, you want people who are really hungry, who have sort of some level of leadership, and you should check for that. And I think the opposite is usually the problem, where most people they leave because they get told what to do, and I see more of the current thing. And but if you see the opposite, it means probably that happened as well.
Actually, you talked about kind of like the growth approach versus the momentum approach, and I'm just curious in the last couple of companies, which side is it more oriented to? For my understanding, growth just means the sales. So in a more corporate environment, that's like heavy growth versus product. I'm just curious, what's the balance between the last couple of places?
Yeah,
different or?
Yeah, so I've seen like such a variation in styles and approach. I would say Amazon was much more product oriented. It was much more long term focused. You're sort of very user centric, customer obsessed. Zynga was a blend of growth and creative people wanting to create these amazing experiences to wow players. And so it was almost like you're making movies, right? Like it's definitely user centric, but it's like the creative person's vision to bring something to life. So there's an interesting balance between growth and so the creative vision. At Headspace, we are much more mission driven. So our product is built on about 2,500 years of teachings and lineage, and so there's been generations of R&D that we lean on, and so for us we lean on sort of the expertise of the teachers and like how we teach meditation. So and I would say it probably leans a bit more on the product side, but it's unique because of the nature of it.
Have you seen products die out? So the product is kind of die out because it's more growth oriented?
Yeah, for sure.
And have you seen that being a recurring issue, where that seems like could be a potentially long term and maybe morale problem?
Yeah. I think the growth hacking mindset is on one hand very tempting because it gives you instant results, and you see metrics move, and you're sort of you can demonstrate success. But the problem with it is not so much with the growth approach itself. The problem with it is when you exclusively spend all your cycles on growth, and you think that that's going to give you innovation, or that's going to give you the next big thing, or that's going to help you build a great company. That's when you trip yourself. It's less so much the process itself, is what you expect from it. If you expect it to deliver optimizations and improvements to different parts of the funnel, it's going to deliver that. If you expect it to create value in a surprising way for users, it's probably not good. So that's why we need a product leader to sort of say like, look, that's good for, we have a conversion flow. Let's apply the growth approach. Let's not waste time like doing user needs and like all that stuff. Like let's just test a whole bunch of pricing, flows, messaging, and get that right. That's the right approach. On core product, like we need to reimagine this experience so it can engage more users, and let's take a more user-centric approach. So I think it's that judgment. Like ultimately, that's what it boils down to. apply it wrongly, then it just messes everything up.
What are some of the common challenges that you've noticed in the various companies, and then how did you solve them? Like if it was a challenge with the developers or designers, you know, how did you go about saying like, you guys, this is how we're gonna rearrange the team, let's say, you know?
Yeah, so I've covered like a lot of the challenges and sort of issues I've faced. I've sort of covered it more as a guidance in this document, which is like, I'll give you an example. I faced huge challenges with just this teams getting married to like metrics and missions, like, and I couldn't like change it for a long time because people were like, oh, I love that metric, I wanna continue to work on it, and it's tough because it's like the system is acting against, the system you created is acting against you to change. So that was one thing that I called out. I said like, look, it's all about setting expectation that things are going to change, and people are uncomfortable with change. So it's important to set that up right. That's one. The other thing is the whole product vision doc is really important. A lot of companies skip that step. You won't believe it. It's actually true. Like many companies skip that step. Like, hey, let's just build stuff. Let's not worry about vision. Like, let's just build and figure it out. And then you have the issue of like designers feeling like, hey, what is the purpose? Like, why are we doing this? And you have engineers saying like, hey, can you tell me what is sort of further down the road so I can architect things right? And so a lot of the challenges I've had, I've translated them into what you should do through this doc. Yeah. So these are all battle stories, by the way. Okay. And they're just framed as what to do, but really they are like learnings. They are like things I messed up and I had to change and get it right.
Can you talk a little bit about in the first step, creating the minimum viable vision? You're working with different personalities, different perspectives.
Yeah.
How do you, in your experience, what have you found successful when you're trying to align, let's say, founder's got this one vision, and then a board member's got another, and then you got a sponsor who's funding things that has another vision, and trying to align them, and also understand that it's an iterative process. It's not like, it's a one-time thing. Yeah. How do you, get them into that mindset, and then kind of work with them to align them on the vision? Yeah.
I think there's a few things there. I think one, you have to be super low ego. If you think that document is yours, you're set up for failure. It's not yours. Like, you're just the author of it. What you're trying to do is you're trying to channel the collective vision of the company in that document. So the first step is just like not worrying about sort of changing and ripping it apart. The second bit is it's simple sort of human psychology, which is if you're let's say the founder, and let's say he's the board member, you want your feedback reflected in the document, and likewise for the board member. So as long as you bake in the feedback of multiple stakeholders to the extent that you don't lose the integrity of the document, you should be fine. The alignment comes because everybody sees a part of them in the document, and ultimately, and it takes time, right? That's why you have to do it so many times. But over time, like, everybody starts saying, oh, that looks good, because they see their own stuff in there, and they're like, okay, that makes sense. So that's how I would get to alignment. It's an organic process.
How are you doing that? On a one-to-one basis, or will it be board members, or will it be groups, or how do you get that iteration?
I think, look, I mean, tactically, Google Docs is the best for iteration because everybody can work on it simultaneously. So just start a Google Docs, just start writing on it, and start circulating on it, and then spend cycles with people so they actually can give you more targeted feedback one-on-one. And depending on interest, sometimes board members are much more, they're not necessarily interested in product, and so you have to test, who might be good candidates. In our case, we have a board member who has a product background, is very, very interested to contribute. So I took her inputs as a key input. But Google Docs is perfect for collaboration, co-editing, and ultimately it's a living document. And to your point, like you can iterate it. But I would say that you shouldn't refresh it too often. A product vision doc is meant to be stable for at least a year or 18 months or 24 months, and then you can refresh it based on learnings. But the idea is to actually create some anchor.
Now, once you establish that product vision and you start, your team start to build, how do you balance giving them the autonomy to kind of go build what they kind of think is right?
Yeah.
Versus keeping them like from veering off the path too far and like building something that's not in line with the vision, and but you want to give them the creative space to go and build. Just they start building something that's not what you kind of agreed upon. How do you balance that?
Yeah. I think it goes back to that slide where we spoke about the what versus the how, problem versus the solution. So there's this sort of famous quote, right, by Einstein, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and then 5 minutes to solve it. So the question, it actually goes back to your leadership style of how much have you thought about the problem? Have you articulated it well enough? Because if you have articulated it well enough, what the team produces should be on target. If you've done a shoddy job of articulating the problem, you can't blame the team if they're going off in a different direction. So I think it boils down to the definition. It boils down to how you set those sort of initial criteria for the team. And obviously, like you build in sort of check-ins and feedback loops to guide them in the right direction. But I think the hard work up front on like what exactly you're trying to solve, and then I do 6-week check-ins with the team just to steer things and then guide them. But you can have any cadence to drive it.
Oh yeah, I wanted to actually kind of piggyback on what he was asking, because the thing I said about competing resources. So I've found that one way where that shiny product all everyone agreed to build on starts looking like something else is when they're working simultaneously on something else and they're being driven towards a different set of vision. I'm just curious if you've ever been caught in that situation and you have to really go across the building to try and see how you can connect that vision with that other like product leader or something. So you have competing visions.
I see, yes.
Right? A lot of times you're working on similar features,
Yeah. So thankfully, I don't have another product leader at. I didn't have one at Zynga. I didn't have one. I was
or a different key stakeholder.
Like a stakeholder. Yeah. I think it happens all the time, especially with my most challenging relationships have been with creative people who sometimes have a very different way of thinking about product, and I think what I've found useful is to one, give them sort of room to innovate. I think it's really important, and the product vision doc actually creates an alignment framework to say like, look, what is important for users, and what are some of the sort of the guardrails and the frames of innovation. So it's not just something arbitrary, which ultimately doesn't deliver on the business results. And third is just building trust. And when you establish deep trust and a great relationship with whoever that stakeholder is, it gets much easier to disagree. It gets much easier to push back and say like, I don't think that's right. I think it's I think we should approach it this way. Instead, if you don't invest in the relationship up front or creating or just disagreeing, I think it creates friction and just like it makes the relationship really hard. So those are some of the tactics, but I think it's bound to happen, and the key is understanding what is the core framework for alignment, and then working out the solutions.
Any ways to skin a cat, right?
Yeah.
One question about the the last point where you mentioned execute and learn, you gave an example of Spotify.
Yeah.
I wonder if you have an example for Headspace on that you can share.
Yeah, I intentionally chose a sort of a more common use case so everybody could relate to it. The data is actually from Headspace. So the data is features that we launched, and the example I can give you is we obviously, I don't know how many of you have used the product, but we have different types of content, and we have this sort of series of lessons that are themed, and those are called packs. We have these individual modules which are singles, minis, and we also have introduced recently certain sounds to help you sleep, so sleep sounds. So for us, it's all about how we've integrated, contextual rewards, contextual channel integration at the right moments to drive repeat engagement, something that you see here. And it's the simple things that ultimately get people to use the product. And it's about explaining why something is useful for them. It's about giving them the tools to remember and come back and use it again and again. So, and a lot of these learnings we've now scaled across the entire product, and we're using it for much better results than, let's say, a year ago.
Talk a little bit about, I'm sure your days and weeks look very different all the time, but could you talk a little bit about where you find yourself spending, most of your time, or kind of buckets of time throughout the week with, what groups, what stakeholders, what type of needs you end up finding yourself in, and
Yeah.
where you think kind of the biggest ROI on your time spent is?
Yeah, I think probably it's an even split between people management, strategy and comms, and roadmap reviews. So that's basically and it's basically not necessarily in that order. It's all, I would say, equally important, because if you start ignoring one, you'll see the results immediately. So people management is usually about really making sure all the leads are well equipped, they're energized, they know what they're running at. The strategy and comms is more about communicating any shifts to strategy up and down, and nailing that cadence of communication. And then roadmap reviews is whether it's design reviews, UX reviews, or it's prioritization reviews, and that's really me sort of steering things in the right direction.
Kind of just triggered an overtly personal problem when thinking about that trifecta of production, analytics, and design. And in a product where you have like very long dev cycles before you truly get it into the product's hands, that design sector, they often get to a point where it's like their innovation capacity is kind of locked on this minimum viable product. How do you kind of give them something to do in that time where they feel like they can be creative but not derail this path towards MVP?
I see. And what time cycles are you?
Like 2-year.
Wow.
Core game development.
Got it.
Yeah.
Wow, that's hard. Yeah. That's hard. So I've been in that sort of mode. I think the key is to create some sort of optionality and sort of cycling of people. You don't see too much software today having those kinds of cycles, right? It's very agile. You ship every week or other week. But I would say that, if you're like a game studio, if you have multiple projects running at the same time, you could experiment with just cycling people amongst projects, or even give people like the Google 20% time, which is, hey, come up with
concepts.
New concepts, and yeah, 2 years is a long time to be working on one thing.
What about internal products? Make your documents look nicer. I mean, not that simple, but perhaps if you have like a intranet that could just use a facelift, do you have anything like that?
Not for that particular game design skill set is very nuanced. But yeah, I think the 20% time is a pretty interesting take because they just production is not where their brain lives.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very I think if you think about a funnel of ideas that ultimately, only a few go into production, then you can have people sort of generating that funnel all the time and making new prototypes and concepts. And I would also, I don't know if this is mobile or console, but even thinking about how do you reduce the dev cycle could help morale.
You had a slide up earlier that talked about iterating until you get a consistent thumbs up.
Yeah.
Can you talk about a little bit about the, I guess, approach, strategy that you take with those members, and how you're generating those thumbs up? What are you, what questions are you asking them?
Yeah.
Are they all this? Are you just handing the product over to them and asking them, what do you think, or is it specific questions to?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's pretty simple. Like what I do is just distribute the document, get people to pre-read it before the meeting, and then we have a discussion. And then different people are just poking holes at it. Like, hey, this doesn't make sense. Like, what does this mean? They're like, great. Like, let's solve it. Like, and then you take another pass. Like, you pull them in again, and then like you give them the pre-read, and they are and each time they're like, oh, actually it makes more sense now. And the feedback sort of dies down over time.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but there's no sort of right or wrong way. It depends on like how your team responds to these kinds of things. Some teams are more creative, like they don't like reading Word docs, so maybe you do prototypes, or maybe you create narratives, or you tell a story, and it really depends. But I think the key is to get everybody's sort of inputs, and
Do you see your role as arbitrating among the conflicts? Because sometimes there is direct conflict. One party says A, other party says Z.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily resolvable in some middle way compromise. Is the arbitration your role?
Yes, I would say yes. Yeah.
Any hints or tips?
You just make the call. Because I think we have a philosophy at Headspace and even prior companies, which is disagree and commit. So basically, we value everybody's thoughts, but at the end of the day, once we make a decision, like everybody commits. And you go, even if you've not voted for it, you make it out.
Well, that's actually sort of my question was, you get all these thumbs up, you get to the roadshow, it just doesn't work out.
Yeah.
Do you just continue forward even though there's a disagreement about that vision? Or do you go back and look at where did it break down?
Yeah. I think, look, the odds that you get the thumbs up at the iteration stage and then it breaking down at the roadshow stage are low, But if it happens, that means one of two things. It means that either the people who you iterated with are very much sort of is not a complete enough group. So you've not iterated with enough people at the company to actually get it to a spot of buy-in, or the people who you iterated with are very different from the people you're rolling out to, and they're not aligned in sort of the view of the future, which suggests deeper issues of the company, right? If you think about it, if some people are thinking very differently from other people, it's not an issue with the product vision doc, it's an issue with the company.
Specifically at Headspace and at your level, how much of an input do the founders have on the product versus how much freedom you have in order to do whatever you want with the product?
I think the answer is very dependent on the company, but to your question about Headspace, our founders are very involved, and so we have two founders. We have Andy Puddicombe, who is the sort of the voice in the product, and he's the representation of the teachings, and he's the sort of the authentic expert that drives a lot of the content. And Richard Pearson is the other founder, who's the CEO, who I reported to. He is the sort of the creative design visionary, and we have like lots of debates around like what to do, and they have a huge presence on what we do, and but less so on some of the growth stuff. They don't get involved as much in like our conversion optimizations or sort of activation flows, things like that. But the core product is very important, to the company. So that's where we have a lot of influence from them, and that's where we create these gates where they can provide their input, and we use it, and then we roll it out.
This one's not really a question, more of a statement. I'm realizing now where I made some terrible mistakes. Thank you. One of them is my vision documents often involve way too many people at each phase. Individual contributor engineers at the same time as let's say the executive leadership, accessing the document, editing the document at the same time. And actually that broke a lot downstream.
I see.
And I see how your iterative approach with different let's say layers would work extraordinarily well, because each layer inherits the decisions from the previous.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
It's a little bit about your personal journey, but just looking at your background, so I think it's mechanical engineering, manufacturing, MBA from Kellogg, right? Nowhere did I see like learn how to code.
Yeah.
So in my mind, I think about product managers, like especially at a growth stage company like Headspace, as being very well versed in coding and IT technology. Could you talk a little bit about that? Like being a business guy myself who doesn't have an MBA, but just spent all his time on kind of financial services and consulting. Interested to know how you have created a
Yeah. I think the sort of the transition for me personally was Amazon. And I think there's some people from business school here tonight, and business school is great because you can test something, relatively in a relatively safe context through the internship, right? The summer internship. That's when I transitioned from sort of engineering to product, and I did that at Amazon, and it was amazing because I just there's so much to learn, and I've never found the need to sort of know how to code. I've actually never found the need. What I've found the need is to understand how software engineers think, and maybe this is a benefit of me having an engineering background. I can relate to how engineers think, and but for people who don't even have engineering backgrounds, what I would suggest is it's actually not a requirement. If you find the right companies and training grounds for you to get good at it, and once you get good at it, nobody cares whether you have that kind of background. It's the initial phases when people have to take that sort of leap of faith in you, where you have to like do a bit of convincing and find the right doors to open. But once you've done it, nobody looks back at like, oh, what did you study, and what are you qualified? Because your work speaks for your sort of track record. So I think for initial sort of training, I think a lot of the big companies are good. Like Google's great, they've got a great sort of program. Amazon's great, and I think Facebook is much more, I would say, I think they pick from other companies as opposed to like fresh people. But I think Microsoft used to be good, but they're a very different company. So I would find like one of these, if you're just trying to break into it, there's lots of these companies that find bright people to get into product, and once you do it once, then the rest doesn't matter. So it's that entry point that is key.